The father of the nation, George Washington, fathered no children of his own. He had 2 stepchildren, but neither lived past 30. When he died, his estate passed to his wife, and when she died, to his nephew. The reasons for Washington's lack of children aren't known, but it's speculated he was sterile. The family of John Adams is rumored to have been cursed. Out of 3 of Adams' sons, 2 became alcoholics. Charles died young, at only age 30, and Thomas died deeply in debt. The oldest son, John Quincy, was a successful diplomat and politician, eventually becoming the 6th president. But 2 of his 3 sons died young. George Washington Adams was an alcoholic and died by drowning at age 28. As a result, his brother, John Adams II, became depressed, descended into alcoholism, and died 5 years later at age 31. The youngest son, Charles Francis, became a successful politician, writer, and diplomat, and through him, the curse seemed to be broken. Thomas Jefferson's wife never served as First Lady. Martha Jefferson died 19 years before her husband ever became president. There was never a contemporaneous portrait made of Martha, and while artists have since created portraits based on descriptions, her true appearance remains unknown. Like George Washington, James Madison had no natural-born children. His stepson, John Payne Todd, was a repeated source of trouble. He was arrested on multiple occasions for shootings and disturbing the peace. It's also believed he was an alcoholic. He squandered every opportunity provided by his father. When given a secretary position, he spent his time indulging in hobbies and buying expensive art. Past Madison's death, Todd's spending habits would lead his mother into debt during the final years of her life. Maria Hester Monroe, the daughter of President James Monroe, was the first presidential daughter to have her wedding in the White House. Other presidential daughters have since followed in the tradition, including the daughters of Ulysses S. Grant, John Tyler, Woodrow Wilson, and Lyndon B. Johnson. Louisa Catherine Adams, wife of John Quincy Adams, is one of only 2 first ladies to be born outside of the United States or the preceding 13 colonies. She was born in London. As a young diplomat, Adams met Louisa while visiting London, where the 2 were also married. His parents initially disapproved of him marrying a woman born in England, but Adams was insistent. By the age of just 14, all of the members of Andrew Jackson's immediate family had been killed, leaving him an orphan. His father was killed in a logging accident just 3 weeks prior to his birth. Incidents during the Revolutionary War killed his mother and brothers. His eldest brother died from heat exhaustion during a battle. His other brother died from smallpox caused while in British captivity, and his mother died after contracting cholera while attending to injured soldiers. As Jackson had poor relations with his extended family, he was left moving from home to home and working odd jobs to accumulate skills and survive. He grew an intense hatred of the British, who he blamed for the deaths in his family. Martin Van Buren, the 8th president, was the first to be born as a United States citizen. As the United States as a country was only established in 1776, all previous presidents were technically born as subjects of Britain. Van Buren was born in 1782. The following president, William Henry Harrison, was the last president born as a British subject. In his early 20s, William Henry Harrison married Anna Tuthill Symes, against the wishes of her father. When Harrison asked Judge John Symes for his daughter's hand in marriage, he declined, so the couple waited until he was out of town to wed. Symes later confronted Harrison, asking how he was going to provide for a family. Harrison simply replied, "By my sword and by my own right arm, sir." John Tyler fathered more children than any other United States president. From 1815 to 1860, he fathered 15 children, and as of 2022, he still had a living grandson, who turned 94 that year. The idea of the 10th president having a grandchild alive to see the 46th president might seem absurd, especially considering Tyler died in 1862 at age 70. However, Tyler was fathering children late in life. His fourth son was born in 1853. At this point, Tyler was already 63. This son, Lyon Gardner Tyler, also had children late in life. In 1928, when Lyon was 75 years old, his son Harrison Ruffin Tyler was born. Being the grandson of a president, Harrison Ruffin was often asked about his interest in politics, of which he had none. He worked as a businessman and a chemical engineer. In contrast with his predecessor, James K. Polk had no biological children. Other presidents without children of their own adopted. Not Polk. While he was married, Polk had virtually no family life. He didn't even own pets. It's been said that, quote, his family was politics and he pursued it relentlessly. Through marriage, Zachary Taylor had a connection to the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. In the early 1830s, decades before the Civil War, Taylor's daughter Sarah and a young Jefferson Davis met, fell in love, and got married. Their marriage was short, however. Sarah contracted malaria and died after only 3 months of marriage. Millard Fillmore's only son, Millard Powers Fillmore, simply known as Powers, was described by future President Grover Cleveland as being, quote, odd in many ways, exceedingly shy, and as someone who didn't desire notice or publicity. Powers lost his mother when he was only 24 and never liked his stepmother. The two consistently clashed, and despite Fillmore's dying wish that they would reconcile, they never did. In fact, they battled intensely over Fillmore's inheritance. Dying at age 61, Powers ended his father's lineage. With no wife or children, he left his inheritance to his aunts, charities, and for unknown reasons, to an unrelated man named John Howcutt. Upon his death, he requested all letters to and from his mother, sister, and father to be destroyed. He gave no explanation, nor has one ever been found. The Shadow in the White House was a name given to Franklin Pierce's wife, Jane, because of her limited public appearances. She was always depressed, as all 3 of her children died young. The first died in infancy, the second died of typhus at age 4, and the third lived until age 11, when he was killed in a train accident just months before the couple moved into the White House. On top of personal tragedy, Jane hated her husband's involvement in politics. Traditionally, White House functions and social events have been led by the First Lady, so they were practically non-existent during the Pierce presidency. James Buchanan is the only president to have never been married. People speculate that he may have been asexual or homosexual, as for many years Buchanan lived with another man, though this wasn't uncommon for bachelors of the time. Though without biological children, Buchanan did adopt his orphaned niece, Harriet Lane. During his presidency, she served as an exceptionally popular First Lady. Abraham Lincoln had only one son who survived into maturity, Robert Todd Lincoln, who became an accomplished man in his own right. Robert was a successful businessman, politician, and lawyer, though he often felt as though he only received job offers because of his namesake rather than his own accomplishments. On several occasions, Republicans wanted to nominate him as a presidential or vice presidential candidate, but he declined every offer. When Andrew Johnson married Eliza McArdle, he was 18 and she was 16, making them the youngest presidential couple to ever wed. Their wedding was presided over by Mordecai Lincoln, the uncle of Abraham Lincoln, whom Johnson would later serve as vice president and successor to. Ulysses S. Grant, a 2-term president and one of the most famed United States generals, died in poverty. This was due to failed business ventures, money spent traveling, and failures of his business partner. However, Grant wasn't going to leave his family with nothing. For years prior, Grant's friend Mark Twain urged him to write his memoirs, as they were assured to make Grant a fortune. Dying of throat cancer, Grant spent his final days vigorously writing. The memoirs were only published after his death, but his final battle was a success. The memoirs earned Grant's wife $450,000, which in 2022 would be equivalent to $12 million. Rutherford B. Hayes banned alcohol from the White House. He likely wanted to gain the support of the anti-alcohol temperance movement, a prominent political force at the time, but he was also trying to appease his wife. At a young age, Lucy Hayes had pledged to abstain from alcohol and was a large champion of the temperance movement. James A. Garfield came from one of the poorest backgrounds of any United States president. His father died when he was an infant, leaving him to be raised by a poor and often penniless mother. During his childhood and teenage years, he was treated coldly and bullied for his poverty. He eventually started working odd jobs, such as a school janitor and as a carpenter. Through hard work and connections, he made his way into politics and into the military. Garfield was able to provide his 7 children with a much steadier road to success, with several of them developing notable careers in business, education, and politics. Mary Arthur McElroy, sister of Chester A. Arthur, served as First Lady, as Arthur's wife had died 2 years before he took office. This is one of the only 2 times a sister served as First Lady. Ironically, the second time was with the following president, Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland came into the White House as a bachelor, and for the first year of his presidency, his sister served as First Lady. In June of 1886, Cleveland married Frances Folsom. Cleveland was 49, and Frances was 21. When Cleveland was 27, he first met Frances when she was an infant. She was a daughter of Cleveland's friend. Benjamin Harrison descends from the Harrison family of Virginia, along with 2 other presidents, most notably William Henry Harrison, who served as the 9th president, but also 16th President Abraham Lincoln. William Henry Harrison and Abraham Lincoln shared the same great-great-great-great-grandfather, but the Harrisons' time in United States politics doesn't end or begin there. Benjamin Harrison V, the father of William Henry, was a founding father and a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and his grandfather, Benjamin Harrison III, was a politician in the colony of Virginia. As late as the 1960s, William Henry Harrison III served in the House of Representatives, and throughout the years, other members of the family had served in various political roles throughout various states. William McKinley and his wife Ida shared a devoted yet tragic marriage. Their only 2 children died young. Around the same time, Ida's mother died, and Ida developed inflammatory issues and epilepsy. By the time the couple entered the White House, Ida was riddled with health problems and emotional instability. In response, McKinley altered the seating arrangements at state dinners so that his wife could sit beside him. When she went through seizures, McKinley would hold a handkerchief over her face to hide her contortions. Even McKinley's enemies admired his devotion to his wife. Months into his second term, McKinley was killed by an assassin. Ida, who had lost her brother to an assassin only 3 years earlier, was devastated. She visited her husband's grave daily until her death 6 years later. Both the mother and wife of Theodore Roosevelt died when he was only 25, and both on the same day, February 14, 1884. The 2 had been suffering from unrelated illnesses. Roosevelt was at both of their bedsides as they died, just hours apart and in the same house. His journal for that day contained a single sentence: "The light has gone out in my life." He did remarry, have more children, and of course become one of the most popular presidents of all time. The infamous Skull and Bones secret society began with the Taft family. Alphonso Taft co-founded the Skull and Bones in 1832. His son, William Howard Taft, joined in 1878 and would become the first of 3 Bonesmen to become president. The 2 others were George Bush and his son, George W. Bush. The 4th potential Skull and Bones president could have been John Kerry, who ironically ran against George W. Bush in 2004. The society has been host to numerous conspiracy theories. Edith Wilson carried more responsibility than most first ladies. After a stroke during Wilson's 6th year in office, he was left partially paralyzed. At the urging of his doctors, Edith took over certain routine presidential duties and delegated which matters were important enough for her husband's attention. However, she did not make major decisions or try to control the executive office. In a book by Nan Britton titled The President's Daughter, she claimed that President Warren G. Harding was the father of her child. A womanizing charmer with a life of cheap sex episodes is how she painted the president. The relationship began when 19-year-old Britton was a secretary, working for 50-year-old then-Senator Harding. The affair continued into Harding's presidency. Britton claimed they once had sex in a closet of the executive office. While the book was the talk of gossip, it was viewed as a despicable attack on Harding's character and cheap attempt for money. Britton didn't deny the monetary motive. Harding, according to her, financially supported the child, but in 1923 he suddenly died and his wife refused to make the payments. Britton was attacked viciously for her claims and eventually gave up on her case. Over the years, others warmed up to Britton's story, especially as evidence of other affairs surfaced, but during Britton's lifetime, there was never any official evidence. In 2015, 20 years after Britton's death, a DNA test of Britton and Harding's descendants confirmed Britton's story. Calvin Coolidge was sworn into office by his father. When the current president, Warren G. Harding, died on August 2, 1923, then Vice President Coolidge was visiting his father in Vermont. In front of a small group, including Coolidge's wife, a Vermont representative, and a labor union official, John Calvin Coolidge Sr. recited the oath of office to his son. Traditionally, the Chief Justice of the United States swears the president in. Coolidge Sr. was a far stretch, but as Justice of the Peace in his town, and with a long history of public service, he had some credentials. A traditional ceremony was later conducted in Washington, D.C. United States presidents and their families have owned all manner of pets. While most common are dogs and cats, other more exotic pets include ponies, ducks, goats, and even a snake. Herbert Hoover's son, Allen, owned 2 alligators. Allen kept the small alligators in a bathtub at the family home. He decorated the tub with plants, stones, and a wire barricade to stop them from escaping, though they still managed to on occasion. After only a few months, he donated them to the National Zoo. When Franklin Roosevelt married his wife Eleanor in 1905, no name change was necessary. This is because the two were actually related. Eleanor was the 5th cousin once removed of Franklin. The two first met when Franklin was only age 4 and Eleanor was age 2, and they would occasionally see each other at family gatherings. Harry S. Truman's middle initial S is not an abbreviation for a longer middle name, but it's simply an S. This is because Truman's parents couldn't decide which grandfather to name him after, Anderson Ship Truman or Solomon Young. Their compromise was to honor both men by simply giving him the middle initial S. Famed as a war president for his World War II service, Dwight Eisenhower was raised by pacifists. Adherents to the Bible student movement, a predecessor to the Jehovah's Witness movement, they were not only against engaging in combat, but also any political involvement and nationalism. Even saluting the flag was off limits. Eisenhower never adopted his parents' beliefs and entered the military at a young age. Despite their disagreements, his parents were supportive. Eisenhower rarely discussed his parents' fringe beliefs. Nevertheless, he always spoke highly of his parents. John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963 was hardly the beginning or end of the Kennedy family curse. Just 5 years later, his brother Robert Kennedy was also assassinated. Of the 7 other siblings, Joe and Kathleen Kennedy both died in plane accidents in 1944 and 1948. In 1969, only a year after Robert's assassination, the youngest Kennedy, Edward, was in a car crash. He survived, but did speculate the rumored curse may be real. Of JFK's 4 children, 3 suffered premature deaths. 1 daughter was born stillborn. Young Patrick only died 2 weeks after his birth, and John Jr. died in 1999 at age 38. Like his aunt and uncle, he was killed in a plane crash. Among the other Kennedy children, grandchildren, and those who married into the family, there have been drug overdoses, suicides, fatal accidents, and tragedies. In just 2020, the 40-year-old granddaughter of Robert Kennedy disappeared along with her son while canoeing. Days later, they were found dead. Presidential curses such as the curse of Tippecanoe and the Addams family curse may have ended, but not the Kennedy curse. As Robert once remarked, somebody up there doesn't like us. Lyndon B. Johnson kept his younger brother Sam Houston close, but not out of any love. Sam was repeatedly a source of embarrassment, and when he wasn't in the White House, he was getting into trouble. The self-professed problem drinker was known for his traffic accidents, one of which got him hospitalized, and then ticketed for backing into a moving van. His drinking alone even led to a brief arrest. In another incident, a warrant was put out for his arrest after he failed to pay the $378 for his hospital stay. He never had a good relationship with law or money. The same year his brother Lyndon died, he declared bankruptcy. Lyndon's estate was also sued that year for over $10,000 of debt Sam incurred. His worst relationship was perhaps with his brother. As children, Sam was the spoiled son. Meanwhile, Lyndon was burdened with the high expectations of their father. Despite holding the most powerful office in the country, Lyndon, according to Sam, was always jealous of his more laid-back and carefree lifestyle. Prior to becoming president, Richard Nixon had served as vice president for Dwight Eisenhower for both of his terms. The choice of Nixon as a running mate was due to political convenience and not friendship, however, and it was long rumored that the two hated each other. This has been attributed to Eisenhower being a political outsider with a background in the military clashing with Nixon's background as a career politician. Despite this, the two were united as one family in 1968 when Eisenhower's grandson married Nixon's daughter. It's suspected that Eisenhower's eventual endorsement of Nixon's presidential run may have been primarily due to this relationship. As an infant, Gerald Ford wasn't called Gerald or even Ford. Rather, he was born as Leslie Lynch King Jr. His parents separated only days after his birth because King Sr. was abusive. He had even threatened Ford's mother with a knife. Gardner would remarry to a businessman named Gerald Rudolph Ford, and the couple informally changed their son's name to that of his stepfather. And when he was in his early 20s, he made the name change formal. At some point, he did try to reunite with his biological father, but a relationship never materialized. The family of Jimmy Carter has an extensive history with cancer. Carter's father, James Earl Carter Sr., died of pancreatic cancer at age 58. His mother, Lillian, died of breast cancer at age 85. Of the couple's 4 children, 3 died of pancreatic cancer in their 50s and 60s. Jimmy, the eldest child, has not only outlived his family members, but also set 2 records in regards to the age of presidents. Having turned 98 years old in 2022, Carter is the longest-lived United States president, and having survived 40 years after leaving office, he also has the longest post-presidency life. In 2015, Carter did have a bout with cancer in his liver and brain, but only a few months later, he was reported as being cancer-free. Ronald Reagan is one of only 2 presidents to have ever been divorced. Reagan married Jane Weinman in 1940. The couple divorced in 1949. He then married Nancy Davis in 1952. Along with the Kennedys and the Harrisons, the Bush family is one of the most notable American dynasties. George Bush and his son George W. Bush are of the only 2 father-son pairs to serve as president. The only other pair was John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams. George Bush's father, Prescott Bush, served as a United States Senator from 1952 to 1963. His father, Samuel P. Bush, worked in several government positions during the early 1900s, such as on the board for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and on Herbert Hoover's Committee of Unemployment Relief. More recently, George Bush's son, Jeb Bush, has served as the governor of Florida from 1999 to 2007, and in 2015, Jeb's son, George, was elected Land Commissioner of Texas. Bill Clinton shares his surname with another prominent figure in United States history. George Clinton was one of the nation's founding fathers and served as vice president for Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. However, there is no relation between the two. Bill's last name at birth wasn't even Clinton. He was the son of William Jefferson Blythe, Jr., but Blythe died in a car accident 3 months prior to Bill's birth. Only at age 15 did Bill take on the surname of his stepfather, Roger Clinton. George W. Bush's daughters were the first twins born to a president. Barbara and Jenna are fraternal twins rather than identical twins. Barack Obama hardly knew his biological father. When Obama was only 2 years old, his father, Barack Obama Sr., returned to Kenya, where he was active in politics and only visited the family once. "I didn't really know my father," Obama wrote. "He left my mother and me when I was only 2 years old, and only traveled from Kenya to visit once when I was 10. That trip was the first and last I saw of him. After that, I heard from him only through the occasional letter. His short trip had a profound impact on my life. My father gave me my first basketball and introduced me to jazz. But for the most part, the visit left me with more questions than it had answered. I knew I would have to figure out how to be a man on my own." Growing up, Obama was raised by his mother and a stepfather. Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump, was only the second First Lady in United States history to be foreign-born. The only other foreign-born First Lady was Louisa Adams from 192 years prior. With the home country of Yugoslavia, Melania is also the only First Lady to have learned English as a second language. At 78 years old at the time of his inauguration, Joe Biden is by far the oldest man to not only be elected as United States President, but also the oldest man to serve in the role at all. Ronald Reagan, who was previously the oldest at the end of his presidency, was 77 years old, a record Biden has already surpassed. At 69, Joe Biden's wife, Jill Biden, also became the oldest First Lady, a record that was held by Anna Harrison, the wife of William Henry Harrison, for over 180 years. To support regular uploads from this channel, consider subscribing and donating to Resyndicated on Patreon. Patreon link in the description below.